Okay, today we're going to do a pro and con analysis of the Harvest Right Eagle oilless pump and the Harvest Right oiled pump, and the pros and cons between each of the two. So I'm going to jump right into it. Let's talk about their similarities first. First is the build. These are both very well made machines. They're heavy. This thing weighs about 42 pounds. This thing probably weighs about 30, maybe 35 pounds. Okay, so they're very well built. You don't have to worry about them falling apart. At least not as far as the outside goes. There's something about this that we need to talk about, and I'll get into that later. All right, the second is the energy usage. Both machines use about the same amount of energy. Now, I wasn't actually able to do an energy use analysis on each one, but I did call Harvest Right and I asked them about the energy usage of both machines. And although he couldn't give me the information on the individual machines, he did have the information available, said that with both machines, the overall energy used by the freeze dryer was about 13 amps. It would raise up to 16 amps during its heater cycle and back down, but it probably averaged about 14 amps. And in Utah, for me, on an average 45-hour batch, that equates to about $7 to do a batch. And that's using both the pump and the freeze dryer itself with its heater and its refrigeration unit. So energy-wise, they are about the same. Let's talk about cost. There is a huge difference between the two. For the oil pump, you're going to pay anywhere between $350 to maybe $400, depending upon who's selling it. For this puppy, when I got this, it cost me $1,625. It's been a couple of years. Well, I was price checking it today and I found out that it is on sale for $1,690. Okay, so the price has come up. It's very, very expensive, and for me, the investment wasn't quite what you might think its value was. So granted, Harvest Right, when you buy a freeze dryer, if you want to opt for the oilless option, they will subtract the price of the oil-filled vacuum pump from this, which will bring the price of this down to around $1,200. Okay, so a freeze dryer that's going to cost you $2,600 is going to cost you another $1,200, so you're jumping the cost of that up to about $3,800. It's not a little tiny investment. It's a worthwhile investment. It's a good investment, but it's not a little investment. So with that, we'll move on. Noise-wise. Noise level, I have seen comparative analysis, and after all is said and done, there's about 4 decibels difference. They say that this one runs quieter. It does not run quieter when it's first started up. It's very noisy, but then it only takes a few minutes to where it will quiet down. But in reality, I didn't find that to be the case. When I first got my freeze dryer, these were on back order, so I didn't get this for about 5 weeks. They sent me home with this one. And I plugged it in and I started using it, and it worked great and everything. And true, I had to change the oil and do that type of stuff. But number one, changing the oil in this thing is not difficult. It only takes a few minutes. Granted, I've got a lot of different containers here, but it only takes a few minutes. And to me, it does not justify spending all that extra money on one of these units, okay? So anyhow, let me tell you how it is I ended up with 2 machines. As I stated earlier, this one was on back order. They gave me this one. They sent me home with it 5 weeks later. I got this one. They said, go ahead and keep this one as a backup. So for me, that was kind of a plus. Well, anyhow, I hooked this one up, and because I didn't have anything to compare it against other than the use of this one, and I was so excited I didn't care. I wasn't paying that much attention. But I turned this on, and I didn't notice that much of a volume difference. And if 4 decibels or 3 decibels of volume difference is enough for you to be concerned, well, maybe you need to move it out of your bedroom and into a utility closet or something, because in most places, that much of a difference in noise isn't going to make that much of a difference to you. Okay, it's just not. But they really talk it up like, wow, that's really something to be considered, and for me, it's just not. I'll tell you right now, this is the one that I prefer to use, and the reason being is I had this one hooked up, and one day it started making a lot of racket, just a lot of noise. And then all of a sudden it got really quiet, but it stopped drawing a vacuum. I couldn't get the vacuum in the machine down below about, I believe it was 1,200 millitors. I called tech support and we did a few things, and we found that this unit needs to be rebuilt. In other words, the seals that's inside of this need to be rebuilt. And so I have yet to send it back into them, but I've been using this one, and I'll tell you, when I disconnected this one and hooked this one up to it and turned this one on, I was really startled, okay? And what startled me was the fact that this one was quieter than this one. Now granted, this one had been making a lot of racket lately, but I had never heard this one run as quietly as this one does when I turned it on. Now, most comparisons on the internet you're going to see are going to be between this one and the old JB. And it's my understanding that that old JB vacuum pump that Harvest-Right used to sell was rather noisy. Okay, and so this one was, noise-wise, was a significant difference. But over this one, the Eagle is not that much quieter. Okay, so I was running this one, and another selling point that the people that are trying to sell you this will tell you is that it will save you time on your freeze drying process. I believe I saw one test, the guy was using trays full of green beans or something, and the difference was about 2 hours, which power-wise and wear-wise, that's significant. But I've never seen that. I didn't see a significant difference. I started out using this one, and then I went to using this one, and then I went back to using this one, and for 2 years, using both of these machines at one time or another, the time it took to do a batch was so negligible that I never noticed it. And I always do the same type of a batch. I always use the machine to its maximum capacity. So that was something that I had to, kind of scratch my head about, going, what are they talking about? Why is this one better than this one, or make the batch run faster? I don't know. I don't know what's behind it. I'm not saying it's not true. All I'm saying is that I have no experience with that. To me, they were both the same. Okay? Now let's get into the gist of the things. One of the big selling points for this, one of the big selling points was hook it up, turn it on, and forget it. Well, that's not true, and it's probably cost me quite a bit of money because I believe that that was true, and because people that are trying to sell this thing aren't going to tell you what they need to be telling you as far as its maintenance. There is a maintenance schedule that this thing has to go through. And I'll tell you exactly what happened. When I first got my freeze dryer, and then I did get this a few weeks after that, 5 or 6 weeks later, and hooked it up, I had my freeze dryer in my garage. And I made a mistake. I ran it when it was approaching summertime, and it got about 80 degrees in my garage. And temperature is very, very important with these two machines, both of them. You have to have them in an area that does not get warmer than 72 degrees. If you do that, then the ability of these machines to cool themselves is lost. They get very, very hot, and they can be damaged. So I'm not sure if the fact that I let this get really, really hot one time caused the seals to wear out faster, but it really wasn't that hot. It did get hotter. I don't think it should have. And anyhow, I brought the freeze dryer into the house. I put it in my dark room. It's a smaller room, but it was the only place in the house that I could put it to where it was going to be out of the way and stay cool enough and whatnot. But I put this in there, and everything was running fine for a couple of weeks. And then all of a sudden, I did start having some problems with the freeze dryer. I had a board go out. In fact, this is the board right here. The heater relay had burnt out, and so we were having problems with the freeze dryer heating up properly and cycling properly. Fortunately, these boards are not expensive, and you don't have to take the unit in to have it replaced. They have 2 screws in them. You just unplug things. You unscrew the 2 screws. You pop this off, and you pop the new one in, and you just plug it back in. So you don't have to undergo the time and cost of having the freeze dryer in. So I did that, and everything was working fine. And a couple of weeks later is when I told you the thing started making a whole bunch of racket. And I went in and was looking at it, and just as I was getting set to shut it down and call tech support, it quieted up. All of a sudden it went really quiet. And I'm going, wow. So I'm watching it, but all of a sudden the vacuum in the freeze dryer, it raised to about 1,400 millitors, and it wouldn't come down any lower. And I let it run and run and run and run, and I think it got down to about 1,200, but it wouldn't get down to where it needed to be. And so I called tech support, and here's where things really got fun. As a matter of fact, here's where things kind of made me angry at the whole process. The tech support, he asked me, he says, well, how long have you run it? Have you run it more than 10,000 hours? And I says, no, I was told by the person that sold it to me that you needed to bring it in and have the seals replaced about every 15,000 hours. And the tech support goes, oh, no, 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 no. I don't know who told you that, but that's not true. These machines need to have the seals replaced about every 10,000 hours. And up to that point, I estimated I had run the machine about maybe 5,000 or 6,000 hours before it had gone bad. Now, I kind of attributed that to maybe I'm the one that damaged it when I overheated it. But I really question that. I'm not going to say one way or another. But that's not what bothered me more than anything else. He says, well, here's what I want you to do. And he says, oh, by the way, have you been blowing the vacuum pump out? Have you been evacuating it every 5 batches? And I go, what? What are you talking about? Evacuate it every 5 batches. And he says, yeah. He says, you're supposed to take the machine and you're supposed to disconnect the vacuum line from the unit and then unplug it from the freeze dryer and plug it into the wall and turn it on and let it run for about a half an hour. And I said, well, why do you do that? And he says, well, the seals inside of it will begin to wear out and you'll get some dust and stuff in there. And you need to evacuate that. And there's moisture, there's permeated moisture in there that you need to have a lot of airflow through for a long time to keep things nice and dry and keep things nice and clean. And so he says, I want you to do that. And so, okay, I went downstairs, come down here and into the room and disconnected it from the freeze dryer. And then this is a check valve. It's a one-way valve. And so I could get maximum airflow out of it, I went ahead and unscrewed this check valve from it. It's easy to do. There's nothing difficult about it. I just hooked a wrench onto it and it came right off. And then something very surprising happened as soon as I turned it on. I don't know how many of you have ever seen a diesel engine. When it first starts up, you get that blast of black smoke out of the exhaust pipe before it starts burning efficiently and you can't see the exhaust anymore. Well, that's what happened with this. I got a blast of black nylon and it startled me and I put my hand down in front of it and it just turned my hand absolutely black. I mean, it was this carbon or something, but it did, and it was blowing out like that for about 10-15 seconds before it finally cleared up. And it just surprised me and I'm going, wow, you mean to tell me the hook it up, turn it on and forget it isn't exactly on target? There are some things that you needed to be told. Oh, I'm going now, wait a minute, okay. All right, so I did, I let it run, and he suggested I let it run an hour. So I let it run an hour, and I put it back together, and hooked it back up to the freeze dryer, turned it on, and no, it wouldn't hold a vacuum. It would not draw a vacuum below 1,200 millitors. And I called him back up, and I says, well, okay, it looks like I might have caused the seals to go bad by letting it overheat and everything, so I'm not going to argue the point with you. So I'm just going to bring it in, and I'm going to let you take care of it. Well, it gets better. I asked him, I says, well, what's the lead time on it? If I bring it in, how long will it take for you to get for me to get the machine back? And he says about 5 weeks. And I'm going, 5 weeks? Why 5 weeks? And he says, well, with the advent of the pandemic and everything, everybody has kind of turned their attention towards stepping up their food storage programs and using their units. And because of that, we've had a lot of units come back in, and we're kind of backed up right now as to how quickly we can get them turned out because we have so many of them coming back. And I'm thinking, all of a sudden, people start using their machines, and now there's a large number of them coming back to the point where it's going to take you 5 weeks to rebuild it. Oh, well, now that kind of told me something about the machine, all right? People not blowing their machine out or not taking good enough care of their machine or not keeping the machine someplace where it's not going to overheat or something like that. And I'm going, oh, okay, oh, geez, all right. There's nothing I'm going to do about it. I bought it. I can't tell you to take the stupid thing back because I didn't pay enough attention to what I was doing. And then, believe it or not, now it gets even better. Now I ask him, I says, well, can I buy a rebuild kit for it? And he says, no, the manufacturer will not allow us to sell the rebuild kits retail. They will only sell them to people that are certified to rebuild the machine. Now, I got online and looked and saw an exploded schematic of this unit, and I can agree with that. Okay, there's a lot inside of this machine that is possibly make it so that a novice or somebody that's not trained to rebuild it wouldn't be able to rebuild it. So I agree with that. Okay. All right. Fine. Jim Dandy. How much is this going to cost me? And he says $375. You mean for the cost of buying one of these pumps brand new, I can get this one rebuilt so that every 10,000 hours or about every 2 years worth of usage, I have to send it back in and spend another $375 to have it rebuilt? Yeah, that's, you know, he just kind of cavalier about it. Yeah, that's right. When do you want to bring it in? He just kind of brushed over it. He didn't want to discuss it with me. He really didn't. So I'm sitting here going, okay, it's really no quieter. It uses about the same amount of power. I don't know about whether or not it'll freeze dry something faster. It's not my experience, and I have done hundreds and hundreds of batches. To be honest with you, had I known then what I know now, I would not have bought it. I really would not have bought it. Because even if this one does absolutely blow up and conk out and I have to buy a new one, the motor burns out and the worst things in the world could happen to it, it's still not going to cost me any more than it's going to cost me to have this thing rebuilt. Now, I am going to send it in, I'm going to have it rebuilt, but this one is going to become my backup. Okay? I am so happy with the way this one's been running. But everybody wants to go, but Evan, oh my goodness, Evan, you've got to change the oil in that thing every batch. Big deal. Okay, do you know what I do? At the end of a batch, I reach over and I have this thing right here, and I love this. This is the best idea that I learned about this on the internet. Somebody had showed me this on the internet. And all I do is I reach over and I loosen this up. This is the import. And I turn this on and the oil starts draining out of it, and it starts draining into this thing. Now this is a Brita water filter. And for changing oil on this thing, it's the best thing you'll ever use. Because look at this. Now, normally inside of here, Brita supplies a water filtration unit. I've still got that water filtration unit. It's still in the package. It's in my garage. And what I have done is you take a roll of toilet paper and you cut about 1/2 inch into the edge of it, and you peel that 1/2 inch thick layer of toilet paper and you roll it up into a really tight wad and you stick it down in here. It fits in there nicely. I like to cut about 3/4 of an inch off the top of that roll, because then it comes down flush with this. Then I put this back in here and I drain the oil into there. And fact of the matter is, it takes about 24 hours for 2 cups of oil to make its way down through that filter. But when it comes out, that oil right there looks brand new. Okay, that oil looks exactly as it does coming out of this, and this is the oil I recommend. I learned this online. I've had people talk about oil turning black after only 3 batches. I've had people talk about all the problems they've had. I've had other people build automatic oil filtration systems, which is a good thing if you're able to do something like that. If you like to tinker around, you build a diesel oil filter and a small pump and a timer and everything, and you can actually filter the oil in this as it's running. But I find that that's really not necessary. As easy as it is to drain, and I use this Dairyland brand vacuum pump oil, and this is what dairy put in their vacuum pumps that they use on their automatic milking machines. This has a detergent in it, and it has other additives in it. It's anti-wear, anti-foam, corrosion protection, oxidation protection. This is good stuff. It's about $33, $34 a gallon, but if you keep filtering it and recycling it right, 1 gallon can last you for 2 or 3 years. So what I do is I simply drain the oil into here, and then I set it aside, and I let that oil drain through that wadded up or that rolled up tissue paper. Then I'll take this, it has the unused oil into it, and I'll measure out 2 cups. And that's this right here. Okay, I'll measure out 2 cups, and after closing this, I'll pour it into here, and you're ready to go again. All right, it's really that simple. Okay, now as I'm draining the oil out of here, I forgot to mention something. There will be some moisture gathered up inside of here. And so I will drain after all the oil's drained out, when just about completely drained out, I will take this and hold this underneath it, and I'll tilt this forward a little bit. And when I do that, there'll be some water that'll come out of here and it'll come into here. Okay, now I don't throw the oil away that comes out with that water. I'll let it sit until the oil and the water separate. Now I have here just an old basting or injection unit that I got from Thanksgiving, and I use it, and I cut the top off so I didn't have those two holes in the side, so I got just one opening, and I would just reach it in there and I would push that down to the bottom of the oil into the water, and that way I could very cleanly suck the water up and deposit it into just an old drinking water. And you can see all that water in there and that little bit of oil on the top, and then I don't worry about it. I'll just set it aside, and when that gets full, I'll suck what oil in there, and I'll recycle that through here, and I'll discard the water. It's really a simple process, and people that are selling these things are going to try to talk up how inconvenient it is and what a pain in the rear it is to change the oil in this thing. But frankly, changing the oil in this thing is going to increase its life, just like changing the oil in your car. All right, you take a little bit of good care with this thing, a little bit of maintenance, and I change the oil between every batch. It's so easy that this thing's going to last you for years and years and years. To whereas this thing, you don't have the opportunity to do that. Those seals are going to wear out, and you are going to pay nearly $400 to have that thing rebuilt, and you're going to do that every 2 or 3 years. And for me, that cost to avoid maintenance on the Harvest Right unit and versus having this unit, the differences or the advantages are not sufficient to warrant spending all the extra money on this one and all the extra money that you're going to have to spend every time this one wears out. And they do wear out, okay? You do have to take them and disconnect them, and you have to blow them out for an hour and let it run for half an hour, and then hook it back up. And yeah, you need to think critically about this, and you need to consider what's a good investment and what's not. And for what you get, for me, the bottom line is this. This is not a sufficient enough advantage over this one to warrant that extra $1,200 expense and that extra $400 expense every 2 or 3 years just to keep this one going. For me, this amounts to nothing but bragging rights. This unit works wonderfully. It's quiet. It's easy to maintain, and the fact that you have to drain the oil and change the oil in it means that it's going to last a long time. A little bit more effort, you'll be happier with this machine. Of course, that's just my opinion. There are going to be other people that may disagree with me. They may say that they had a hard time with it. They may talk, but believe me, I've used both of these for hundreds of hours, and I know the bottom line for me is this is the one to go with. Oh, and incidentally, after the oil has drained into that, I will take out this top unit here, just so you'll know. And I will take this, now this is my recovery jar or container, and I will simply pour that oil back into here, and I'll watch for any water. And I'm not going to pour 100% right there. That's all I'm going to pour. I'm going to leave it a little bit in there because that's where the water is going to be if there is any. So what I do is now I have the recovery container. When this one empties out, I'll take all the oil in here and I'll pour it back into here, and the whole process starts over and over and over again. Okay? It works. It works very well. Then I'll put this back into there, and I will wait for the next time I have to drain oil. Oil goes into this. Super simple, and it's nice. Now there is one more thing about the oil-filled unit as far as maintenance goes that you have to consider. About every 30 batches, and for me, I'll do, you know, instead of counting batches, I do about once every 6 months. But you need to drain the oil out of here. I let it drain for a couple of hours. But once it's drained out, I'll go ahead and close this up. And then you see you got these 4 screws right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Their Allen head that you use to take those 4 screws out, it takes a few minutes, it takes some effort, but then this whole front unit comes off. Now don't let that intimidate you, because there's nothing inside of it. It's just a glorified oil pan. Okay, there's nothing inside of it that you're going to have to reach in and disconnect, nothing you're going to have to line up other than these 4 holes here. And you take that off, and over the course of every 6 months or 8 months, you will get a little bit of sludge inside of here, just like you will in any oil pan, in any car. You can get a sludge buildup, and you'll take that out, and you'll take a toothbrush and some hot soapy water, and you will wash the inside of this unit out. And then you'll take a cloth and put it underneath the unit, and you'll do the same. You'll kind of scrub off any sludge you might find in there. You don't have to get crazy with yourself doing that. You don't have to sit there with a magnifying glass and try to scrub every tiny little piece you find. Get 90% of it out so that you can wipe it out real good and there's no sludge. That's easy to get to, and then you go ahead and you put it back on. You tighten it back down. Don't wrench down on it like Hercules. You tighten it down till it's snug, and then give it another little wrench, and that's tight enough. And you have to do that about once every 6 months. Okay, but that's part of the maintenance program on this. But I'll guarantee you, doing that once every 6 months is a lot easier than pulling this thing out and disconnecting it and plugging it in for a half an hour. Because running the thing for an hour, that's going to take some energy. And if you forget to do it, or if you become lazy and you decide you're not going to do it, and you're going to let it run batch after batch after batch without blowing it out, without doing the necessary maintenance on this thing, then you're going to destroy it. It's going to cost you $400 and maybe 5 weeks to get your machine back and in operating condition. So you have to remember to do that if you have an Eagle. But on this one, oil changes between every batch, and then every 30 batches, or maybe 6 months or to a year, pull the top off and scrub any sludge. And there's not going to be much. The last time I pulled this off, which was just recently, using this oil, there wasn't any real sludge in there. I could have let it go another 6 or 8 months using a good quality oil without having to pull this top off and clean it out. With cheaper oils, that will happen to you. Cheaper oils have a lot of impurities in them. They have a lot of additives in them that you don't want. They will darken. They will turn bad. I had one guy on the internet say that the oil that he was using actually destroyed the machine, made it so that the rotors in there wouldn't draw a vacuum. So just save yourself a lot of time. Save yourself a lot of heartache. Save yourself a lot of energy. Go ahead and invest in good oil. You'll only have to invest in good oil once every 2 or 3 years, and keep your unit clean. It's not that big of an investment in time or effort, and don't let anybody tell you that it is. Because the guy that's trying to sell you this thing is going to make it sound like this is a drudgery unimaginable. Oh no, gotta change the oil. Oh no, and they'll flash it to you in big letters, change the oil. You know, nah, don't believe it. Don't believe it for 1 second. What it takes to take care of this machine is nothing, really, when it comes to the cost of maintaining this one. Room temperature makes a big difference. Just a few degrees. If you're running at temperature about 70 degrees, your freeze dryer is going to work fine. These things are going to work fine. Everything's going to be fine. If that room temperature increases as little as 8 to 10 degrees, both these will overheat and your freeze dryer will fail. And the reason the freeze dryer fails is because the refrigeration unit can't keep up with the requirements necessary to keep that canister well below zero. And it has to be able to keep that canister below zero in order for the freeze drying process to be effective. And so when I brought my freeze dryer downstairs and I put it in my little dark room in there only has about 120 square feet. Now, I did that on purpose. I don't need a lot of room, and I painted all the walls black, and that's why I'm doing this out here instead of in there. And it ran fine because it stayed cool in that room. The temperature of the room would stay about 70 degrees because it's downstairs, there's no windows, there's nothing to make it hot, and it would stay at about 70 degrees, and as long as I left the door to the dark room open while the units were running, everything was great. Well, one day I was doing a photo session out here, and I closed the door because the pump was running, and it was this pump. Okay, and I'm doing a photo session, and I didn't want a lot of noise, so I closed the door, and you couldn't hear it. But I forgot to open it back up again at the end of the day, and the next morning I went down there, and this little pump right here, the heat generated by it, caused the freeze dryer to fail. Okay, it actually raised the temperature of the room up to about 80, 81, 82 degrees, which is only 10 degrees, 10, 11 degrees in what it is normally, but it was enough to cause the freeze dryer to fail. So when you buy a freeze dryer, make sure that you have it in an area that will maintain air temperatures at or below 72 degrees when you're running it. In fact, I was concerned enough about it that I saw something on the internet. One gentleman had bought one of these little fans and he had it blowing down on his vacuum pump, and apparently it was working very well. So I bought this, and this is sitting on a shelf. It overhangs the shelf a little bit, so there's a stool that I have in front of it, and this is sitting on it, and it's blowing up onto it. And that's the same stool I use to put my Brita oil filtration system on when I go to change the oil. So it all works out very, very well. This keeps this pump nice and cool so that I don't have to worry about it overheating, and the room, that little room in there, doesn't overheat, and I still have to keep the door open a little bit. I only have to keep it open 8 or 10 inches, which really down in the basement it doesn't make that much difference anyhow. So anyhow, there you have it. A good comparison between the oil field and the Eagle oilless pump. For me, bottom line is this is a little more than bragging rights. It looks really cool sitting next to your freeze dryer, but the advantages aren't there to justify the cost. Okay, you may disagree with me, you may not, that's okay. You know, to each their own. But I thoroughly am satisfied with the oil field. Changing the oil is not a problem. And so with that, we'll end that there. And I would ask you, if you would like to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell, subscribe, and share. Share with other people that might want to have an unbiased opinion about the two of them, okay? I've used both of them a lot, and I know what I'm talking about. There's not that much difference. So with that, also, you see right there in front of me is my gallery. Now I'm sitting in my studio. I do a lot of photography, but it's not just in my studio. I do a lot in my dark room. I do a lot of architectural and landscape and other types of photography. So if nothing else, visit my gallery. There's a link down below, and tell me what you think. I even accept challenges. If people that want to see me do something particular or shoot something particular, once you've seen my fireworks especially and my water drop photography, I think that you might be impressed. A lot of people are. So with that, I'm Evan Rowell, and this is Critical Thinking.